Good afternoon, and welcome to the Carolina Codecast, the official podcast of the Carolina Code Conference. I'm your host, Barry Jones, and with me today is Robert Roskam. Say hello, Robert.
Why, hello there.
Thanks for joining us today. And so, Robert, you so what are you up to these days? I think you're with Pantheon now, right?
Yep. I'm an engineering manager at Pantheon.
Okay.
You can elaborate on what Pantheon is if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead. Maybe I can get him to sponsor the show one day.
Perhaps. Pantheon is a web host. We host WordPress and Drupal sites. I suppose I should probably be on brand and say that we are a WebOps platform. So we provide more than hosting. Yeah.
What do you consider WebOps?
Anything that you can get to with the browser. So HTTPS kind of stuff. We're meant to automate the management of websites. So if you compare us to, I'm going to go off brand now and be like, hey, if you go to any other commodity vendor, you can find a server for $5. We're not a good comparison to that because you have to manage your own database and manage all your other different pieces. And we handle all that automation management for you. So we're sort of a bunch of different things together in a box that you don't have to worry about. And you get them just by virtue of paying for a flat rate.
Yeah.
And even then, I would say if you have one website, we might be fine. 10 websites better, 100 websites. Yeah. That's our customer. 100 websites, right? So anyone who's got a large book of websites and need to manage a lot of them.
Well, I got to use Pantheon a few years ago with the company that I work for, and they hosted a pretty high traffic WordPress site. And it was a really good experience. Mm-hmm. But I was very impressed with the approach and the management and the polish that went into it in terms of helping you to get your different environments up and running and make it easy for a team of people to work on it. Because it can be a little tough to sometimes collaborate on a WordPress site.
Yeah, we basically automate the dev test live that a lot of people say that they want to do, and then they have a hard time maintaining themselves on a small team. So yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. Well, so you were originally slated to speak at the Carolina Code Conference and had to bow out at the last minute due to illness. Thank you for not spreading it to everybody else. So
I figured no one else would get COVID. Yeah, I took a COVID test the day before. I was like, I don't have the COVID, but feels like the COVID. So I bowed out, and the following Monday I did have COVID. So yeah, I was glad that I didn't turn it into a super spread event.
Yeah, I greatly appreciate that also. But we missed having you there. It ended up going well. This is actually the mug I keep telling you about that you didn't get because you weren't there. I realized, and I hate to tell you this now, I think I gave your mug away to one of the volunteers who was helping out. So
that's fine, man.
Yeah, I was just trying to get rid of the extra inventory at the end. Everybody who'd been helping throughout the day, and so
maybe... I have so many mugs just floating around. It's just fine, right? So I have this mug. I'm sure you recognize this mug. So
yes, I do. Actually, for a long time, I had a bucket of 6 of those. But
yeah.
But so for anyone who's listening and can't see it, that's he was holding up some mugs from a company that we used to work for together a long time ago. But so you weren't able to speak at the conference. We hated not having you there, but you did just get to give your talk at the first ever HackGreenville Nights event hosted over at OpenWorks. And so that was October 12th, I believe. Yeah.
It was 50, 60 people there. It was great.
It was a really solid crowd. Good food too.
Yeah. It was great. It was a kickoff of the tech scene again in the upstate here in Greenville, South Carolina centered. Yeah. But it was great to be all right, the COVID's, not completely, but mostly over. Here, let's get together and kick things off again.
Yeah. So what did you think of the event? What did you think of the setup? It was a unique structure compared to other meetups that I've been to in the area before.
Yeah, it was interesting. So I was the first of two talks, and it was unusual. It was an unusual feeling to be like, hey, I'm head to head with another talk that I'm giving at a meetup, and people have to pick, right? And
Yep.
these things aren't recorded. And so it was,
Yet.
uh, yeah, yet. Yeah, but it was kind of cool to have a bunch of people show up, and I didn't actually expect it to be quite that large. Like we have,
I don't think
I
Jen did
helped,
either.
yeah, helped manage. I started the Python meetup, the local user group here in Greenville in like 2015 or so.
Yeah.
And I was at like several different other ones, like the .NET one. Uh, and let's see, I went to the JavaScript one that was here. Then went, of course, to the Elixir one, the Ruby one. I've been to all the different user groups
Yeah.
and helped run a couple different ones. This was the first time I'd ever been to a user group where the quantity of the people that signed up was lower than the quantity of the people that showed up. And by a
We had a bunch of
large
walk-ins.
quantity. Yeah, it was supposed to be, I think it was 55 signed up, something like that, 54, 55, and then
Yeah.
we had easily 60 people there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess that's right. It must have been the taco bar that really brought everybody out. And they heard there was going to be a taco bar with a little Mike and Jeff's barbecue there. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there were homemade sauces from some of the various volunteers, and they did a great they did a really great job with it. It was delicious food, and even had ice cream sandwiches for dessert, which was a
Yeah.
nice touch. But they brought everybody out of the woodwork for this. Phil Yanov was out there, um, and so the way they set it up, they had basically four speakers total. They had you and Zach Robichaud, I think it was. I think I'd say his name. He gave the talk right
Yeah.
after you, the PHP, the
Yes.
Laravel talk.
Yes. Yeah.
And then there was Ryan Lancio, who gave his preparing your workspace using culinary techniques talk, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then Pete gave I saw the debate after on LinkedIn about how it was described. So how would you describe the Pete talk?
Well, I didn't attend the Pete talk, so I can't
We were
describe it.
discussing it a lot online afterwards in terms of routines versus scheduled days and whatnot. I'd
Yeah.
care more about just diligence in your intentions for how you're going to spend your day.
Yeah. Like there was I mode it, the thing being referenced is Pete basically had a follow on LinkedIn post, I think it was the day after.
Yeah,
And he raised a question of like that he didn't have a great answer for his talk. And I didn't hear his talk at all, but it was basically a person who described self-described as a creative being like, well, routines are great and all, but what if I'm a person who like thrives better underneath no routine whatsoever? I'm like, I just fundamentally have a hard time believing that, right? um, I have a hard time believing that there's um, that you want no routine whatsoever, and I differentiate that from schedule, because usually people like to do one thing and then another thing, another thing. It's very human to go ahead and do things over and over again in a particular order.
yeah.
Um, and if you do things in no order whatsoever and think that's the best way to live, I'm like, okay, I've actually yet to meet that person,
You'll never
right?
be bored. Yeah,
Yeah, you'll never be bored. Um, but like I don't think I fully fleshed out my argument because I was actually starting to run out of word count. I was like, the people who are like the most prolific writers and well known to be, they're not bad writers. They have routines that they do each day. They may not schedule them exactly the same. Most of them do actually.
yeah,
But like the idea of following a schedule and following an intention and being like, at this time, I'm going to do this. Even if they're loosey goosey, right? Like I'm going to do this one. And then afterwards, I'm going to do this one. And then afterwards, I'm going to do this one. And it's going to take about this long.
yeah.
It's,
On the
it's
on
better
the
than,
creative side, I think the answer to that might be carrying a notebook or keeping a pad around so that when inspiration strikes you, you can capture it. Um, that's probably more how, whether you actually sit down and write everything at once or you're just trying to
Right.
conceptualize everything. And it might be, I definitely have to say that I always wonder if there are certain things that just follow a popular narrative and people just begin to say that, oh yeah, well, I am this way, therefore I couldn't possibly have a schedule or something along those lines. Similar to how it became really internet meme popular for everybody to say they're an introvert. And I don't know how many people who say they're introverts are actually introverts compared to just maybe a little shy. Because, years ago, I would have considered myself an introvert. And my wife is an actual introvert. You would never confuse our two sets of behavior. Like I'm definitely I'm much less shy now, and I'm happier to be out around a crowd just because I got past the shy aspect of it. But crowds literally drain her.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think here, like on whenever personality tests, people have different opinions about them, but whenever I've taken them, I'm usually like right on the line, right? So like whatever I've been doing too much of recently, I'm on the other end of it. So if I'm been around been around too many different events and large groups of people that I don't know, then I'm an introvert, is what I score as, right? And then vice versa is also true.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but yeah, like one of the things,
how would you like the extrovert opportunities at HackGreenville to mingle and talk to everybody? I'm going to segue us back on track.
This is a conversation. There is no track, right? No.
Yeah, every now and then you do have to steer a little bit.
Fine. Yeah, I enjoyed it. I gave my talk, and I sort of intended to go in and listen to another talk afterwards, and then just sort of talked for another hour and a half to random people, right?
Yep.
Because I hadn't done so in a long time.
That makes good sense.
So yeah.
So what was your favorite thing besides talking, or besides you're giving your actual talk? What would you say is your favorite thing from being there?
I'm the person who goes to conferences for hallway talks, right?
Nice.
So hanging out and talking to all the different people that I haven't met before or haven't seen in a long time. It's the reason why I go to events in the first place. Yeah. So like in many ways, like I sort of chose what I was going to do at that point in time for the rest of the evening of, like this is great what I'm getting to do at the moment. I think there was, I'm forgetting the person's name, unfortunately, but we talked for a little bit. The person's a career changer, and it was an interesting career changer because he like knows a lot about programming already. He's going to get a degree, and he already had some sort of technical degree.
Interesting.
And he was just had a hard time getting in his foot his door his careers because he is like hands-on technical installation of stuff at the moment.
Yeah.
But we went and talked at length about a programming language called Dart and using Flutter.
Oh, wow.
A framework.
That is interesting. So, I'm familiar with Dart a little bit. Isn't Dart like sort of a front-end JavaScript type language that Google made?
Right. Yeah.
And so what's the big selling point for Dart? Now I'm curious.
So I'll be honest. The selling point for Dart,
you're allowed to talk about this stuff.
the Dart itself, I've yet to see anyone who's just like, oh, you should use Dart for this. It's always contextualized inside of Flutter, right? So the Dart programming language is I'm sure you can find counterexamples in the same way, but Flutter in the same way has sort of dominated the Dart programming language in the same way that Ruby on Rails has dominated Ruby, right?
Yeah.
So the point of time that people think of those as one and the same.
That makes sense.
So anyone who wants to do mobile app development and they don't want to do React Native, or they don't want to do just straight native, so doing something in Objective-C or Swift, or doing something in Java or Kotlin, they're being like, oh, I would like another thing, and for some reason I want to do cross-platform. Your options of languages is limited to like, well, you can do JavaScript and React Native, and there's a few other different things like Ionic and stuff like that. And
Yeah, I've
it's
heard of
Flutter.
All right.
So, in Flutter, I've built some stuff as well, and it's nice. It's pretty nice. I like it.
You need to have a conversation with Pete from Simply Binary. You should schedule something as part of your routine to do this, because I know he's a huge Flutter fan, and that is interesting. I'm actually I haven't lined up a date yet, but there's a guy who runs a Flutter meetup in Charlotte who we're going to have on the show at some point in the future as well.
Cool.
So be on the lookout for that if you're interested in cross-platform mobile app development. But so I mean, what would you say is the biggest selling point to Flutter? I've never done any type of mobile app development at all. I've always been curious to do it at some point, but I always end up spending just a lot more time on the back end and the database side of things. And but if I was going to, I would definitely want to do something that made my life as easy as possible, like Flutter.
So here's the lesson of doing anything cross-platform. The selling point of them all is, hey, you don't have to learn this other programming language that's part of it. Like, you can write it in one language and it'll work in both. It turns out to always sort of, depending upon the implementation, be a lie in some form or another, right? You actually kind of need to know a little in order to be able to make any progress, because each of those ecosystems of doing stuff in Android, doing stuff in iOS, is like classic desktop development as opposed to web development. And you have to understand, you have to use the IDE at some level or another that vendor has made for you. So you have to use, at some point in time, one of the two popular, whichever one you're focused on, you're gonna have to go in there and do something. You may not need to write a single line of Java or Objective-C or Swift or Kotlin. You may not need to, but you'll at least need to like look at them for a little bit and be like, oh, I have this configuration file that's screwed up in this specific way that I need to fix now. So if that sounds familiar to you,
it does. That was, if I recall, that was actually your take on Elixir as well, because you have to learn a little bit of Erlang at some point if you're going to use Elixir. So this is I'm sensing a pattern in Roskam's programming lessons here.
Yeah. So like, you always have to sort of like learn the undergirding thing as well. Otherwise, you're going to have you're going to be at a disadvantage when trying to work with it. So the selling point for Flutter is you get to write it in one language. It works pretty well in cross-platform. And it has lots of things that makes it feel a little more like JavaScript. It has a component-based architecture, so it feels a little bit like doing like a React Native, and in some ways, or programming React. And it is productive enough, right? So like, it's got a nice clean CLI and things like that. It's pretty nice. I try not to rag on technologies. I've learned better at this point. I take
everything has a purpose.
Everything has a purpose. There's a criticism of Flutter that it doesn't use a lot of the native components. That is to say, the button that the default button that you have inside of iOS or inside of Android, is not that button. That is a criticism of it. The criticism on the flip side, because the other like major competitor in this space is React Native. React Native wraps those things and maps to those things. That's why it's called native. Part of the lie, though, in my opinion, of React Native is that you could use web components interchangeably with the native components. And my experience with it was that's not true.
Okay.
They are not hot swappable with React Native and React. So if you were a React developer, you went in and started just to use your plain old components, you ran into problems pretty quickly.
Oh, that makes some
but
sense.
This is true of Flutter. You can actually target both web and desktop and iOS and Android, and you don't have to have a couple different trees of types of components.
So they don't use the native just so that they can have consistency across platforms, basically.
Yeah. So the downside of this is that depending on what your application is, you might have some problems with it. But if you're okay with that trade-off, then that's fine, right?
Yeah, exactly. And worst case, you can always just go and learn Swift and Kotlin and just do it native.
Yep.
on each platform. And I've only ever heard good things about both. There's some people who really swear by Kotlin. They just absolutely love that language. So so who knows? Can't ever learn too much, right?
Yeah. I recently came across, I don't know, like I have strange hobbies, man. My most recent hobby was like, I wonder which programming languages let me use emojis as variables. So I started to look around for programming languages. The only one I came across so far was Swift.
Why would you want to do this?
I didn't want to do it. I was curious if there was a programming language that would let me, and I came across Swift. Swift let me. So I tried a bunch of different things. I was like, surely JavaScript left me. It's like, no, it doesn't. It made the wise choice here.
Oh my god.
I was like, okay, let's see. So let's see if Python's making mistakes. Nope, Python didn't make that mistake. That's good. Did Rust make this mistake? Golang, all the other ones, obvious ones, like yelled at me. No, don't do that. That's stupid. Please, why?
Emoji Driven Development in Swift. Now,
So like, there's like, I'm a firm believer that there's probably not such a good thing as like best practices, but there are definitely things as bad practices. Best practices like are probably too far contextual, and your context matters a whole lot. But bad practices, I could probably name a few.
Oh my goodness, I'm literally speechless right now. I have no idea what to do with that. Like, you're gonna have to segue us back on track at some point here, because I don't know where to go from emoji-driven development.
Well, as I said, I got weird hobbies, man. Weird hobbies.
Yeah, I'd be a little disappointed if you didn't have weird hobbies. It seems like every deeply technical person that I know will end up finding some type of random interest that just pulls them in a direction that you would never have expected them to go. And
I'm usually trying to figure out how to do something when I have when I have some free time and I don't know what to do with myself, and for some reason I don't want to go out and like go out and touch grass and go on nature some way. Like, and I'm like, I'm in front of a computer and I don't want to make anything. I'm usually trying to figure out how to abuse things that other people have made in some way, and figure out what's something something weird or interesting. So it goes all over the place. Like I'll get us back on track here. What was that?
So do you have a future in cybersecurity, you think?
Maybe, I don't know. I find weird uses for things. So get us back on track. If you go to the Refactor Greenville webpage, you'll notice that.
What is the address of the Refactor Greenville webpage, Robert?
refactorgvl.com.
All right. I'm going to go have to visit that. So tell me, Robert, what is Refactor Greenville?
Oh, well, I'm going to talk about the background first, because that's more interesting to me at the moment.
Where did Refactor Greenville come from, Robert? I'm going to give you a proper prompt there. Now go right ahead. Let's hear about it.
Well, yeah, the Refactor Greenville is this. It's a nonprofit that I created with two other people here in South Carolina. It's meant to be a is on a mission to transform the upstate into a nationally recognized tech hub. So we are trying to support things here, such as Carolina Code Conference and sponsoring that. And so it's myself, Richard Lawson. He's engineering manager over at Colinks, and David Siglin, who's a product, I think he's a lead product manager over at Stitch Fix.
Nice.
And so it was set up by us, but I still have to talk about my background, man. Like, what weird hobbies and stuff.
Jump into it.
The weird background. So the thing
Apparently
that I did,
one of your weird hobbies is trying to turn the upstate into a tech hub, and so I can relate to that hobby because I'm trying to do the same thing with the conference. I'm trying to create an amplification platform for all of the interesting things that go on around here, not just in the upstate, but the wider region. But the upstate is the central point.
Yes. Yeah, that's you got it. You got the vision, the spirit.
I'm going to go ahead and preface one thing as we go down the weird hobbies route, though, before we come back to Refactor. When I upload this video to YouTube, I have to say whether or not it's kid safe. So, knowing that, route your way on the weird hobbies. Just know that I might have to flag this thing if it's too weird.
It's not that weird. It's not that weird. It's not NSFW weird.
All right, just had to make sure. I wanted to give fair warning.
That's fair. So with SVGs, you can do CSS animations on SVGs bound to them. Yes. So
I knew you could pop them up and color them different stuff and do all sorts of stuff with sizes, but I feel like I have actually seen animated graphs with SVGs. Is that kind of the same idea?
Yeah, I'll share it here to you, whether or not you can see it come across here. You see the background, see those dots moving around?
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool.
That's an SVG that's in the background that is semi-transparent with a couple different layers, but the SVG itself is an object that's embedded with that animation code with CSS inside of it.
That is really slick.
It looks better, of course, on your own monitor and stuff like that. This is going across the wire and stuff, but that is the. I had I think it was David who's like, I need something cool in the background. I'm like with an animation. He's like, I'm like, man. He's like, Robert, can you come up with something? And I'm like, I don't know animations. He's like, I believe in you. I'm like, fine. 30 minutes later, I had this.
That is a really slick effect, and that's just SVG and CSS right there.
Yep.
Man, that's really cool.
So this is continuing on the theme of using technology in ways that's not exactly not meant to be used for, but just trying to push it in weird ways and be like, can I do this? Right? Because he wanted a weird animation. It's like, I know how to do stuff with SVGs. Can I do CSS and do keyframes and transitions and stuff? Because that's all that is.
Well, I've seen people use DNS as a key value store as a distributed key value store, and so I can definitely support the idea of taking things down really weird paths that way.
That is something I actually mentioned just this morning to someone else. I was like, I wonder
what are the odds?
There's all this space that's available in DNS. If you own a domain, you just get for free. All you have to do is just probe it every once in a while, and it gets propagated out for you. I'm like, I wonder if there's a way to use this. I don't think you should use it as a distributed store, but you can.
You can. You have to take cache invalidation strategies with where you're changing the keys, because you can't count on them expiring in a reasonable amount of time on their own if you're gonna make changes. But there are definitely interesting things you can do with a DNS.
But what if you combine it with a concept like CRDTs, where you have a
Explain
conflict?
CRDTs for our audience real quick.
Oh goodness. I'm not a super expert in this one, but basically it is a way to do a use case for it would be like Google Docs, where you have multiple different people typing the in the same document at the same time.
Okay.
What happens if one of those if there's a network partition and one of those goes offline? How does Google Docs reconcile a person who's continued to work with the rest of the work that's being done? So this is sort of a specific application of like CAP theory, right? You can pick three: consistency, availability, or partition tolerance. And generally speaking, CRDTs are a method by which for you to do something other than an algorithm like the Raft algorithm to do consistency and to get eventual consistency. And so CRDTs basically use set theory in some implementations, the ones that I'm familiar with. And if you, with set theory, repeat an operation, you get an idempotent response. So if I add one to a set, and then I add another one to the set, I still have one. I don't have two ones. I have a single one. If I add two to the set, I still have two. And so if you have a series of operations of adding one, and it gets, you don't have to debounce it in any way like that. You just coalesce those values together. So I can imagine combining together CRDTs with DNS and making a distributed key value store where there's some sort of software that sits on the edge to translate those in and out. And you don't have to worry about cache invalidation because you just write new records of some kind or other to new fields and know about those other keys.
That is an interesting thought. Interesting.
How am I going to use it anytime soon? No idea, right? Yeah. It was just a thought of like I could combine the two together.
Look, so half the fun of doing anything with technology is because you can. I mean, it's not necessarily a good idea. I mean, goodness gracious, if I can ever make this make the conference website come together, it's going to be weird and it's going to be pointless, and you would never do what we're going to do on this thing. And the entire reason to do it is because we can and because it'll be funny.
So, please tell me it's going to be something like, the Space Jam website from the 90s.
No, it's not going to be that. Not on the design side, more on the architecture side. We're going to do, the goal is to have every single page that you visit be served by a different programming language.
Please tell me you're also using multiple different infrastructures and different deployments of the same kind, right? So like one place you're using AWS, another one you're using GCP, and one place you're using a container, another place you're using a Lambda.
We don't want to be ridiculous, Robert. I mean, come on now. No, the idea is essentially we're going to have one database backend, and we're going to have multiple APIs generated in different programming languages or created in different programming languages by volunteers. And then we're going to deploy each API to a Kubernetes cluster, and we're going to randomly serve you from one of those different languages. And we're going to tell you which language served you the page that you're visiting when you do it. And then volunteers can get in and they'll be able to compete, kind of like the Tech Empower benchmarks, to see if they can make their stuff go faster and whatever else. And if they have a favorite language that they want to see represented, if they want to say this page was served to you by Swift using emoji variables, here's a page that does it, and here's proof. We'll show you a little sample of the code or something if you want to. But yeah, I figure you would never do it in for any reason other than just because you can. But I think it'll be fun to do for the conference personally. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and for I'm that eclectic just in general, right? In my interest period, because if anyone who looks at video looks behind me, they're like, "What is going on with Robert's background?" Because it's all over the place. Like I got cardboard over there. I got that thing right there. I got a spool of copper wire. Why do I have all those different things? Why not? Right?
I'd be disappointed if you didn't. I mean,
all right. Well, I guess I have to, put on my
you put on your Refactor Greenville hat. You'll actually have hats yet? Because it's a good looking logo. I could definitely see you doing hats with those.
Yeah, I told David, it's like I kind of feel like I need one of those on a trucker hat, right?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like a thing.
It does.
So David's the one who did the logo, but activity wise right now, it's been pretty we have this goal, right? This larger lofty goal, and all we're trying to do is just be infrastructure for other people who are already doing things, or people who don't know how to get started and want to do something. That
So
sounds really
talk about how
vague.
that works. I know you're doing some work with Hack Greenville, the Slack channel, and the kind of brand in general.
Yeah,
So, are they a good example of the type of thing you're looking at, or do you have other examples that you'd kind of like to?
sure. They're a first example.
Okay.
So they already exist as a bunch of different people doing something together in the community, and they have a problem that they've had in the past, which is when someone decides they want to be done, then you now have a new problem of, hey, I need to quit. I need to hand all the things that I own because this is like a community effort. So it's basically a, a bunch of people got together in a parking lot somewhere and put all their cars around and hung out for a bit. And then someone's like, done. And they're like, well, I'm the person who's been in charge of bringing the water. Someone else needs to bring the water now because I'm done.
Yeah.
And all we're trying to do is provide a little bit of structure there. So when people want to quit, there's a place for them to drop stuff.
Yeah.
That's it. Something to actually own things.
And that makes perfect sense. I mean, we saw it with a lot of meetups. Like I know one of my favorite meetups to go to for years was the Upstate PHP meetup, and the reason I liked it was because they were really broad in their topics. Really, anything around web development was open. I gave a Go talk at the Upstate PHP meetup one time, and it wasn't. And they were happy to have a wide variety, and there was probably, I mean, they regularly had about 30 people there. I feel like, and it was running really well. And you had two people running it. Uh, you had Adam from Orange Coat and Ryan McAllen also, and Stephen Wade actually was also really involved there. And then at some point, everybody, like Adam moved, Ryan he did a little bit of a career shift, but we got him back for the code conference. He made it out to the conference this year, and so we're trying to bring him back in the fold. He was a staple of the community for a long time. And
Cool.
and Stephen Wade, had kids, and that makes you busy.
Yep.
And he also went back, and I think he actually went back to school and worked and to get his degree and to get his comp sci degree, I believe. But he got busy also, and then we couldn't find anybody who was willing to take it over and keep running it. And it's this thing that had been established for like 10 years. I did not have time to do it at that point in time. And if you go out and, it's one thing to take it over, but if you're going to hand it off and you can't find somebody to run it consistently, do you want to be an army of one, just responsible for coming out and saying, all right, well, I'm going to do this every single week if you've never done it before? Do you want to deal with the guidance and the calendar and running the meetups and how to handle the communication? Like I know when I took over the conference, I had no idea what I was doing. All I knew was that I needed to talk to people a lot to get stuff going. But the thing that I had going for me was that we hadn't had one since 2019, so it was kind of like it was starting from scratch anyway. I wasn't changing the tires while we were on the road.
It's true,
but it was. I could definitely see the need for that. I know that's been really near and dear to Jim's heart from Hack Greenville as well. As he sees things growing and wants to make sure that there's that infrastructure there and that support system. Because I imagine it can wear you out if you're starting to try something and you're not getting a lot of fights or interest. So
yeah. So the main goal of Refactor Greenville in general is just to be it's a legal entity. It's a 501(c)(3).
Okay.
And we're also registered with the state, so people can in fact donate money to us. we're allowed to go out and solicit.
Nice.
And the kinds of things that we're looking to do are things like Hack Greenville is already doing, and just be like, hey, do you want to be able to like have like a place where you can put passwords, right, to things?
Yeah.
Or do you want what do you all need to keep doing what you're all already doing, and you just have to do fewer things because there's one entity that can just sort of backstop you all? So yeah, we want to see that I would say like constituency were the people that do things in tech, as opposed to like there's other interest, right? Like there's the employer side, there's the investor side. We found sort of in Greenville, this is probably not unique, right? But in general, a lot of tech scenes in cities are driven by, can I start a business and get investors, or can I start a business and find employees? And then there's this other constituency of like, there's the people who actually like to do things in tech, they're actually interested in the tech itself, or making the business with tech, right? Like, but they're the makers of things, and they want to be able to get together and meet other people. Yeah. Those are the kinds of people that we see as our constituency.
Nice. I think that was actually, I remember Jim talking about that was one of the things that he wanted to do with the with this quarterly-ish HackGreenville Nights format too. Is the reason he wants to have more than one talk is that if you've got a meetup that you're looking at starting, or you wanted to start a group in the area, and rather than just starting a meetup cold, you could apply to give a talk about the subject or starting the meetup at HackGreenville Nights when there's going to be a wider audience there. And then you can see if that's going to be something that will, from there, kind of launch into being a meetup. And I thought that was a great idea, because if, this is esoterically connected. Just trust me on this for a second. So years ago, I started a poker game when I was in college. When I was in grad school, we did a little $10 poker game. And it just was an excuse to get people to come out to my apartment and play cards for a little bit. I was really into Rounders at the time. That movie was really popular, and it was early 2000s. The poker scene was really big. But we did a little $10 game. It was when I was in college, I could eat a little bit better for the week if I had a good night. But you do it, and you do it weekly. Or sometimes twice a week, because you were in college and bored and had time to do more of that. But the turnout, sometimes you get, you schedule the entire thing, you plan on it, you plan your time around it, and then no one would show up. And then other times you'd get one person, two people, and you couldn't really do what you want to do. But the consistently of doing it over and over and over, eventually you start getting your regulars, and it becomes a thing. But those early times when you're getting started, when only a couple people or hardly anybody shows up, or if you've been going for a little while and you have a dead night, it can really be depressing. I mean, you've got the consistency of being willing to stick with it and having that support system around you saying, no, we want to see this thing succeed. Here's some help. Here's ways we can get the word out. Or if you're looking for, how could I have done this better? You'll have people like yourself who have run meetups and other events, and people like Jim who can help to make this thing happen, to give advice and to help you figure out where you could steer things. And I think it's a very overlooked but critical aspect of something that we need here to kind of help things grow. You almost call it the fertilizer for the growing community.
Yeah. Like one of the things, I kind of believe that one of the things that's necessary for this is money, right? So that's why we have 501c3.
Yeah.
So we can get money piled up together.
Oh, that's why I'm constantly sponsored for the conference. So if anyone's listening, we need sponsors.
And piling money together in one spot helps a lot, right? But if you are a person who wants to put on a meetup, and you say you're well enough off, right? You have enough money, you have your free time, you could go off and do this kind of thing. You're not having to make a choice in your life of, do I feed myself or do I go do this thing, right? So putting that caveat there, right? So you have this thing you want to do. You can go out there and you can do it solo, and you can try to bring an audience to you to talk about something that you're passionate about, and then try to get someone else as passionate enough as well to be able to show up there and give a talk, or however the format is, right? You can do all that, but that's a lot of different things to have to learn. And one of the things that I've have a moderately strong opinion on is motivation and means aren't enough, right? in order to be successful in something. There's usually some level of mentorship that also has to go along with it. Like, it doesn't matter how much money you have and how much interest you have. If you decide that, hey, I would like to do some sort of activity or skill, and you decide to ignore the universe of all the advice out there and put blinders on and only do it from how you just try to self-discover it, you're going to be in for a hard time. Now, like, I'm not saying that it's impossible. I'm just saying I've never met someone who's done the less extreme version, which is like read it out of a book and then go do it, right? Yeah. Like, you learn so much by trying to do it. Then you actually learn from doing a book. You kind of want both, but then you also, if someone else can come along and like, hey, there's this minor thing. If you do this a little bit different, it's going to be way better. And it's difficult to get across in text. It's difficult to get across in video demos or anything else like that, because it has nothing to do with showing the right way to do it. It's correcting the mistake that you made, right? And the mistake, everyone makes mistakes in a unique way. And so my favorite example of this one is like, riding a bike is a thing that a lot of people learn how to do. I've yet to hear of someone who's learned how to do it out of a book. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I've never met the person. And this is true, I believe, of other skills. And one of them is also doing things like these local tech meetups and stuff like that. Yeah. And if you go there and you attach yourself to what we're trying to build with HackGreenville, of like a default place where people can go to on a quarterly basis to be like, hey, I want to give a talk. You can see how things get done and you can ask. It's meant to be a support structure for other people. And we're trying to backstop even them, because like right now, HackGreenville has to go out. It's not a big deal, but they have to go out and ask for money, and they have to have the space and everything else like that. And that's mostly on Jim's shoulders right now, right? If Jim at some point in time, wants to take a break out of that, it would be great to have someone who has an official owner, some sort of officialness lives beyond one person. So the thing that's been built up can live beyond that one person. I'm not saying everything in existence has to be like that, but like, it seems reasonable to try to backstop that kind of thing and be like, hey, absolutely, we'll go and we'll figure out how to like promote events, right? And things like HackGreenville Nights. So we'll figure out what it is to like message and market these things over time. So the people who are the makers and workers and the coders in the space will show up to the right places. Yeah. And the events are like one thing. Another thing that I believe that probably needs to exist in this sort of mentorship and like continuing to interact with someone who's actually done something before. You've experienced this, I'm sure. You go off to learn a new skill and something in tech. And your choices are, generally speaking, I'm going to go watch how to do it on YouTube, or I'm going to buy a book about it.
Yep. That's where all these came from.
Because literally, there's probably someone, like other career fields have continuing education, right? They have people whose jobs it is on a part-time basis. They do a thing for a full-time, and then they go somewhere and they teach some sort of CE thing.
Yep.
You don't have to make a full-time job out. It's just a thing you can do on the side. Like, that's one of the things I'm also like trying to push forward. I'm hoping that we don't have to like run the whole thing, but like if there's like night classes, it's like a 4-week one-shot on GraphQL, right? And acquire some skills about GraphQL, or doing open API spec, or doing something containers, or you get the idea, right? Like there's a bunch of different things like that. That I know that you can ask ChatGPT.
I'm kidding.
I'll let you take it down that road however you want to. Right?
I'm kidding.
Like ChatGPT is like the sophomore in college who learned about all these topics in his freshman years and is expert, right? And will talk at length about them. And if you actually know anything about the topics, you every once in a while will like push back and be like, hey, I don't think that's right. It's like, I'm sorry, you're right. I was wrong. So somehow I was able to like combine both the sheer competence of that sophomore personality and also a self-reflection to be like, hang on, I was wrong about that. And then
Yeah.
sometimes it will persist in being wrong too, right? So
Yeah, I have actually used ChatGPT a little bit, and on the rare occasion that I do use it every now and then, if I didn't already know what I was doing, uh, it would be an absolute mess because they give you some things that are helpful and then other things that are not helpful, and if you don't have a good way of determining what's what or understanding what doesn't belong, um, you're going to go down some weird paths. But at other
yeah,
points, it's really helpful. If I'm ever looking for a good code example of something that I can't find a good answer on with Google these days, usually even the most random weird things, it's good. And I was very surprised by some of that stuff. So
yeah. The kind of like the nuance of certain things are like when it hallucinates things and hallucinates things confidently.
yeah,
So are some of the ones that are difficult to work with. So I know some people at work that use the GitHub Copilot,
yeah,
and they use it, and the company has a CLI that they make, right? So they make a CLI for the purposes of interacting with their product,
right,
and it consistently suggests combinations for their CLI that don't exist and have never existed, but it thinks should exist and will suggest to them for and like putting in docs and things like that on how to interact with it. So they
yeah,
just sort of have to turn it off, right?
yep.
So
That
like that's like one. There's another one of like when languages evolve and get better, or at least that's one side of it. There's also like the bad practices side of things where like
yeah,
it'll suggest to you like SQL injections and things like that.
mm-hmm.
That's like the more obvious one, but like the less like horrendous one I recently came across was, I believe, uh, I did some interaction with it here point at some point in time with some JavaScript, and it suggested a for loop for JavaScript, which is totally valid syntax. Um, but in a context where most people would actually use a map these days. And so it's not that it's wrong, it's just sort of has the whole internet's history of opinions and normalizes
Yeah,
that to being like for loops were the thing 15 years ago, 10 years ago. And it's completely, well, more than,
yeah,
15 years ago.
and that's actually, this isn't necessarily AI related, but in a similar sense. Like years ago, I needed to implement an anti-spam solution for a messaging tool, and we
Mm-hmm.
were seeing a lot of very specific spam going over the messaging system that was within our platform. And so, having never written an anti-spam algorithm before, I had no idea what I was doing. And so I started looking for off the shelf solutions, things that you could plug into that might have a smarter idea about this. And so the really popular one at the time, I don't know if it's still popular anymore, but the really popular at the time was something called Kismet. And it was really popular for anti-spam on, specifically with like WordPress blogs. But the type of spam that we were seeing within our system wasn't the same type of spam that you would get in blog comments. And so, because it was essentially seeded based on what it was seeing in all these WordPress blogs around the world, it didn't help at all with what we were doing internally because it wasn't targeted towards the problem. And so we ended up just building our own. And oddly enough, it really wasn't that difficult to do it because it was, I think we used the, what's the algorithm called? Levenstein distance algorithm. We used
Oh,
Levenstein distance
yeah.
to detect similarity, and ended up setting up like a catch and release based on the recent patterns from your account. And so we basically just looked at the spam that was coming from you and just compared it to the other stuff you were sending. If you were sending a lot of very similar or the same stuff, and it worked great.
Right. Yeah.
It cut down on almost everything that we were seeing because people would create an account and they'd blast the same type of stuff out everywhere, and then you could just adjust the percentage of similarity that you counted against based on how new the account was or how well engaged the account was. The more established accounts, we would give a lot more leeway, and it worked great. It was a real simple solution that worked. But I imagine when you're dealing with something like Copilot, it's a similar thing. They're like, okay, we have the whole internet opinion version, or do I want just what's within my application? And so there's another one of the AI dev tools that I don't know if they're still doing it, but it's called Codium, and it's got all the various plugins for your IDEs and everything, and it's they're basically writing their own. And it's got a little built-in chat thing right now, right in VS Code or whatever you're using, but it uses your own code base as its anchor for everything, and it'll make suggestions based on what it sees in your code base to match like the coding style that you're using or things that it sees referenced elsewhere that might be like, oh, how do I look this up or whatever. And it's really good. It's not going to give you the whole internet's worth of knowledge, but it will definitely make good recommendations to you based on what it's seeing within your own code. And it's very targeted that way. And I don't know if they're still doing it, but for a little while they were giving free lifetime accounts to the early adopters, and so I got a free lifetime account. So I'm a little biased, but I'm pretty happy with the result of what it's done. But yeah, and so
Cool.
I'm trying to remember how we got on this path, but where did we go from here? I'm trying to remember how to segue back on. We've gone everywhere here. So we came to
I warned you
from Refactor.
Yeah, we were the line was I'll do the line backwards. I can go either direction, but I'll do it backwards. The line was
the conversation.
The ChatGPT. We were talking about a particular.
We were talking about Refactor Greenville and its guardrails for you for everything for getting meetup set up and the guidance and learning things in book versus learning things on YouTube versus being able to ask people for advice. And
right.
And the rest of the I made the joke about ChatGPT and it took us down that whole path. So I apologize for that.
Right. No, you're fine.
But asking people in person for advice is definitely the way to go. There's no substitute for experience, especially experience when you're local. I mean, whenever it came for the conference, I had a bunch of very experienced people like yourself that helped me out with that.
Yeah. It has to be like contextualized experience, right? Yeah. And because there's a problem that usually, this is another one of those things that I sort of deeply believe, what I sort of referenced earlier, is like, I don't think there's necessarily such a thing as best practices. I think there's bad practices. And one of the reasons why I think there's not necessarily such a thing as best practices is because there's too much context that's usually needed to figure out whether or not something's best for you, whatever the problem is. And so I tend to eschew dogma that way, right? Of like, this is the way it must always be the way. And like Greenfield and things like that, and like truly Greenfield, like brand new company, then there's a lot more there. But I also tend toward like the boring technology philosophy of like, you have only so many innovation credits to spend with a group of people. And so if you're experimenting on too many different ideas at the same time, that is to say, if you're using technology you've never used before, on a programming basis, on a database basis, you go down the line, you don't know what you're doing, and you're going to wind up spending time yak shaving somewhere, right? There's going to be some yak that you didn't intend to shave that's getting shaved. Why? Well, because there's this doesn't come from any specific context, but there's like a Cassandra database on a particular old version, and you're in there for some reason needing to update the driver for your particular programming language that no one has any support for anymore because they left it behind. You spend a lot of innovation credits being like, I'm going to be an early adopter in something or another that no one else does. And all of a sudden you find yourself over here shaving this yak. This could be in Haskell. I don't know. Who knows?
that expression, I still don't know how yak shaving became a mainstream expression in programming.
Oh, I chased this down.
Of
Because
course
this
you
is,
did.
you know,
Of
yeah,
course you did. Let's hear it. Now we
this
have
is
to
the
go.
this is yeah, there's a I think I started to write up because I have my blog, right? blog.robertroskam.com.
Of course you changed
And
your name.
I tend to do this intersection of of things. I like the intersection of like how people make software, best uh, practices that tend to send you in the right direction, right? So
Right.
like recommended practices. I prefer to use that language as opposed to best, right? Uh, and then also uh, human language and how humans interact with stuff. So I like my post that I put out this morning was like maxims and manifestos of makers of software. So like going back
Where
to that
was
history.
that post, Robert?
Blog.robertroskam.com.
blog.robertroskam.com. All right.
Oh, I see what we're
Subscribe
doing
to
right
that
now.
newsletter. Anyway, go ahead.
But yeah, the yak shaving came from, as I seem to recall, MIT, and it was a like memo that someone sent out referencing what someone else was saying inside the organization, saying like, hey, like a lot of people attribute it to Seth Godin in 2005, but
Okay.
it's from before that. And it's a person talking about doing activity that's unproductive because, yeah, uh, doing activity that's unproductive, and the people attribute it to. I'm looking at here. Carlin Veary, but that's, as far as I know, not even correct. Because when the person, let's see, Carlin Veary, nope, that might be correct. There's a memo, and I'll share this on my screen real quick. Maybe this will be the last one because this will be the we truly went all over the universe here. But
Yeah, we
here's
did.
the old memo.
Oh, wow.
You can see there was a Girl Scout benefit, 5:30. But this is the original example I came across. So it was Carlin Veary who innovated the term.
So that makes it look like it seems like you're doing something that's unproductive, but you're doing it because of the chain of events that led you to it.
Correct.
Interesting.
That's the argument is that was basically going back to like the innovation credits concept of like, if you're doing too many things that are brand new, then you're going to wind up in this situation. And you didn't need to, right? You didn't need to innovate in everything, right? Like
Yep.
your innovation can stop somewhere, right? You don't have to both innovate your organizational structure and your project management and your technology. You don't have to write your own database and write your own wiki software and whatever, right? If you're never invented here is not necessarily what I'm talking about. Like I'm
Right.
talking about even like adopting things that other people have done. It's new and shiny to you, and you've never used it before, right? You don't have to
Absolutely.
innovate on everything.
Yeah. And it's interesting how some of the stories of that go down weird roads too. Because I mean, wasn't Slack created because it was like a game company and they created a chat
Mm-hmm.
system, and the chat
Mm-hmm.
system became more popular than the game company.
Mm-hmm. It's
So,
yeah.
but I can't remember if that's the actual term or not, but I believe that's essentially where it came from. And I'm sure at some point somebody was like, you don't really need to be building a chat system. That's not what we're here for. It's like, oh well, I want to. It makes me happy. And then
Yeah.
boom, company.
Yeah. Like it's complicated to like talk about because like for every single one of those where I'm like, don't innovate on everything. You can give me a counter example of that. But like I know like there's a guy that I know
Yeah.
uh
I'm not
who
arguing with it.
they
I'm
have,
just saying there are
yeah,
definitely exceptions. That's all.
they're definitely exceptions. There's a guy that I know that their software is very niche. It's like research software, and they made their own wiki system from scratch.
Interesting.
You're like, cool. Do they sell it? No, they just use it internally. They will never do anything but use it internally. They've had it for a long time,
But they're happy with it.
And they continue to like maintain it and stuff. But like, I worked at a couple different places that did a lot of that stuff and like made a lot of their own things internally, including like a time clocking system and including things like those other kinds of like wiki systems and whatnot. And we like trashed most of them eventually because the amount of time you were spending maintaining those things compared to what you're supposed to be doing was silly.
Focus is hard.
Yeah. Focus is very hard.
Yeah.
As this podcast shows.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I think we're playing to our audience here, Robert. But anyway, anything you'd like to close out with? I know we're over our allotted hour right now. But big things happening. Refactor Greenville, HackGreenville Nights, next year's Carolina Code Conference. Y'all are helping to make the Upstate a tech hub. And honestly, there's probably one term that you should definitely know, because apparently this is really going to become popular, or there are people that are really trying to make it popular in the Upstate. They want to change how we refer to the Upstate, because anytime people hear Upstate, they think Upstate New York. And,
Sure.
And so apparently there's work that's happening to try to brand our corner of South Carolina here as the Carolina Crescent. And so I believe the Crescent 1 building is a little bit part of that. And I think there's going to be a lot of Crescent-oriented innovation. And the basic idea behind it is that if you look at the state flag, that half moon, that crescent is in the upper left corner. We're in the upper left corner of the state. And so that's where it comes from. But I thought it was interesting. So if you see crescent popping up a lot in the future, then you can continue.
I like that better than other things I've heard.
Yeah, you can work on making the crescent a tech hub. But anything else you like to add? I kind of gave you a closeout there.
No. Like, this is I don't have anything else going on that I want to talk about in particular. But this was great. Thank you for having me on.
All right. Thanks for joining us. And that is the Carolina Codecast. And also thank you to Herd Media, who's helped us put this podcast together from the very beginning, with a lot of coaching and advice and good contextualized experience to get us right on the right track. See, we can bring it all in. So thank you. This has been the Carolina Codecast.